That's right. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. 6 minutes past the top of the hour. That hour is 12 noon here in Crescent City, California. You're tuned to KFUG Crescent City, 101.1 on your FM radio dial, worldwide on the internet, kfugradio.org. This is the second hour of Public Process for this Earth Day. I'm your host, Mike Thornton, and we are joined by Ted Ward. And for those of you who've been listening to Full Logic Reverse for the last several months, you know I'm like a groupie fan of Ted Ward. I say it all the time when he's not around. He's the Stephen Hawking, the Neil deGrasse Tyson, the Albert Einstein of recycling. Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management for the County of Del Norte. And I was able to call Ted, asked him if he would be on because it's Earth Day, and certainly dealing with all of this trash that we generate as a society, and particularly recycling, hopefully can play a big role in doing what we can to make our planet a healthier place to live for ourselves and for our kids and their kids. Ted Ward, thank you for being with us on Public Process today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm blushing quite heavily, but I do appreciate being compared to those great astrophysicists, as my background actually, my graduate degree was in physics.
Oh, really? Okay, well, we're going to find out some more about that. And then, all right. This is a little bit behind the scenes stuff, right? So in addition to Ted Ward being all those other things, right, we start playing Living Color's Cult of Personality. He goes, Living Color, they're really good. And so, yeah, and like Ted has this knowledge of like sort of thrash metal as done by African American bands. So Ted, you just went up a whole nother level for me.
Well, we can talk music. I used to be a DJ, actually.
Oh, really?
KHSU.
Oh,
they had
a bloodbath down there, didn't they?
Yeah. There's another public topic to talk about. But yeah, unfortunately, it's a university licensed station, and essentially the university decided that they didn't want to be in the radio business anymore and made some very drastic decisions that did not indicate they appreciate how much the community had invested in that station.
Well, I think they're going to get an earful of just how much the community was invested and is invested in KHSU. It's not going away. So we're going to talk a little bit about who you are and why you do what you do. But since this has come up, let's stay on KHSU for just a minute. You were a broadcaster there.
Yeah.
This has happened. Your statement is they don't want to be in the radio business.
Why don't I give a little bit background about how much I was involved in KHSU?
I think that sounds like a great idea.
Because I was of course, I was a listener member for many years. I got my master's degree at Humboldt State University. But later on, I became involved in the Community Advisory Group, which essentially is public members and citizens who are concerned about the station and offered advice to staff. So I was on that board for several years, I think 4 or 5 years. And I also was a volunteer broadcaster. I produced a 5-minute news program in association with Susan Andrews, who had trained me there. And then I also had a late night radio program called Between the Covers, where I started and ended with a cover tune, and then each hour followed a theme.
So you were really involved in this radio station.
So I really cared, and I'd seen how it evolved over the years. But essentially, most recently, they hired a station manager who, for all intents and purposes, to me seemed like a hatchet man. Shortly after he was hired, he got rid of Katie Whiteside, who had been with the station for years. And honestly, I agreed with some of the public statements that were made, which is if you have a problem getting along with Katie Whiteside, you're probably the one who has the problem, because in general it was a very community oriented station driven by a lot of volunteer programmers, like I'm sure you are, and that's part of what keeps a community station alive. And so over the years, essentially, Humboldt State University, going through financial challenges as many do, decided they were less and less interested in actually doing what was necessary to support the station. And I can understand those kinds of decisions, but I also really value public radio and community supported radio. And that's an investment of the community that I think anyone who holds the license, whether it's a community license or a university license, really needs to respect the level of engagement of the members who helped finance the station and keep it alive for all of those years. And to just shut it down without any plan or conversation with the community, I think is at best an unwise move.
It reminded me very much of something that happened at KPFA a number of years back, where there was a similar situation because the Pacifica Radio Network was going through its own internal problems. Some people know, others don't. I have a background in community radio. I was a news director and then also a volunteer broadcaster and a board member at KVMR FM in Nevada City. Excellent station, great people there. And so, I just want to say it's really important, and KFUG is a nonprofit, non-commercial, truly community radio station. I would encourage anyone who is listening, whether you're a business owner or an individual member of the community, to support your own community radio station in your own community, KFUG. Make sure it is vibrant and responsive to the community that it serves, because we can see what happens when decisions are made to just axe all of that in another community, right, and the impact that it can have not only on the people who are involved in the station internally, but all of the listeners who depend on the station to provide a alternative set of programming based on different values and different perspectives than what's normally available in commercial radio.
I think it's so important. It's part of how a community comes to understand itself, is to have forums that are driven by local people and engaged in by local people about local people and local situations. And unfortunately, we're losing a lot of that. Sinclair Broadcasting, for instance, took over the station in Eureka. So there's that. So it's really these public radio, public television forums that are, I think, among the most vital news sources that we have right now.
Well, and I don't want to turn this into a media discussion, though we could very easily do that as we see consolidation in news coverage all across the spectrum, the one thing that without local news coverage by and for people who are from that community, that will never be filled by something from somewhere else. It will be a void, and this is me talking, this isn't Ted talking, I want to be really clear about that if you have voids like that in local communities, there are no other entities that can and will hold elected and appointed officials to account for their activities. That's not an accusation, it's just a fact. And that's why supporting local media is particularly important. And so I would encourage you to consider that, because without these locally driven, community-driven media entities, there is nothing, and when there is nothing, that's darkness, and bad things happen in darkness.
And we don't really, for instance, when you look at these larger media landscapes, it doesn't make a lot of sense for our agencies, for instance, to promote what's recyclable in Del Norte County in a broadcast area that's maybe reaching Curry County or Humboldt County.
Right.
One, those listeners don't care, and two, the listeners that I'm trying to reach aren't necessarily the ones who are listening. Right. So it really does depend on having local information resources.
We're joined by Ted Ward, black thrash metal expert, community radio expert, Stephen Hawking of recycling, somebody who's going to help me build a quantum time machine out of pizza boxes and fuel it with like pizza grease.
That last bit was fictitious.
Well, who knows, right?
Well, the show's young, but I don't think I can bring you there.
Well, we'll give it. We'll see. I have faith. Okay, no, seriously, we are talking with Ted Ward, director of Del Norte Solid Waste Management. It is Earth Day. It's 17 minutes past the top of the hour, and we were here and are here to talk about managing solid waste and recycling in the context of Earth Day. But Ted, thank you so much for sharing that other part of your life with us, because that's one of the things that we try to do, is to not just talk about what people do, but who they are and why they do what they do.
So shall we walk through that?
Let's do it.
All right. So I've been interested in solid waste and recycling for a really long time. Part of that is because I'm older now, but also
it's all relative, Ted.
Yeah, way back when I was in high school, for instance, I ran for student body president, and I was all about litter cleanup because we had all the litter blowing around the campus, and I just didn't like it. So that's that was my beginnings in looking at litter cleanup. When I was in college, I joined the Energy Programs Task Force, which at that point was the group that did recycling on campus. And to give you an idea of how long ago that was, we introduced glass recycling at UC Davis. So we started recycling bottles and cans. My degree was in applied physics, quantum optics.
I knew it.
Because I was really interested in physics and metaphysics, and I worked as a manufacturing engineer for a couple of years after I graduated from college, and then a couple of years, almost to the day, I had known from the time I was in high school that I really wanted to join the Peace Corps. So I joined the Peace Corps after being a manufacturing engineer for a couple of years, and as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya. The solid waste system was not developed at all. There was no collection, there was no disposal. And so the standard thing that people did is they had a little pit that they would dig, literally like 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. And they'd put all their trash in there and they'd burn it periodically.
Right.
Well, I liked music. So I had all of these D-cell batteries because that connected me to my huge boombox that had BBC radio, which I needed for my cultural survival. And then I had all these mixtapes that I brought with me for the music that I love so much. But I'd run through these D-cell batteries, and they were alkaline batteries, not rechargeable. There was no way to recharge them. There was no power there. And so I'd have all these batteries left over, so I put them in my burn pile. I didn't know what else to do with them. And I even wrote a letter home saying, whose responsibility is this? People are on water wells here, and they're burning these piles. I don't know if this is a good thing, but whose job is that, really? The folks who sell the batteries seem to be interested in selling them, but education as to what's the right thing to do with the battery when you're done with it, there's nothing there. So I noticed some kids from the neighborhood were digging through my garbage pit, and they were pulling out all these batteries, and I thought, well, they're finding some use for them. Maybe I could do that. So I was teaching chemistry and math and home science and physics, and so I figured, well, I don't have any lab equipment, so I can use those D-cell batteries as standard weights, and I can tell them about balances. I can make a simple scale balance and show balances and things like that. So I built up a small curriculum of physics lessons you can use using D-cell batteries, and I taught other Peace Corps volunteers how to do it. So one more use out of those batteries, but it did rather beg the question in my mind about who is responsible for all the distribution of all these global products, and what's the right thing to do with those after you're done with them. And so when I came back to the United States after my time in the Peace Corps and a little bit of traveling, I found out there was a law that was recently adopted. At that point, it was 1990. And at that point, there was a law called the California Integrated Waste Management Act of 1990. That was passed in 1989, but essentially it required each municipality in the state of California to cut their waste in half by the year 2000. So this was the big spur in the side for getting a lot of recycling programs rolling across California.
Was to reduce the waste stream to get it down to that 50%.
Exactly. So there was already recycling under what's known as the AB 2020 program, the California Bottle Bill, that still supports the recycling buyback centers that we have. But there was also now this focus on trying to make each city and county responsible for planning for how they're going to cut their waste in half. And so that became what I would discover is my profession. And so I worked for a few years in the Berkeley area, and then essentially moved up to Humboldt and started going to school in Arcata, and I got my master's there as I was working for a recycling market development firm called Gaynor and Associates. Maggie Gaynor's still there, does some work with the university, but great background in community development. I think you'd really appreciate her work, but that was the orientation that she came at recycling in, because recycling was an opportunity to organize the community and to help make it look better. So Gaynor and Associates had done some pioneering work looking at recycling market development. And so while I was there, essentially they worked a series of programs that starred Fire and Light. I'm not sure you're aware of them, but
I'm not.
They're a company that, the idea was, okay, so we're collecting all of these materials. What can we make out of them? Since we're shipping them to be marketed somewhere else, maybe there's some manufacturing opportunity. You can keep those materials local, add more value to those materials before you ship them out. And rather than shipping them out as baled recyclables, ship them out as products. You're going to make a lot more money that way, which is a good approach in general, and there are only so many things that can be made at the local level, but pressed glass products was absolutely one of them. But it's a great lesson in terms of all sorts of things about recycling. But Fire and Light is a very successful company. They're still active in Arcata, and you can go to Plaza Design, for instance, and get this lovely glassware. But it's very high end. It's beautiful. It really is. It's vases, dinner plates, thick glassware that you would use on your table.
Well, that leads me then to ask the question, is that something that is replicable here in Del Norte?
Well, let me finish the story about Fire.
Okay. Let me remind people that we're talking with Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management for the County of Del Norte. And please, go on, sir.
Yeah. So Fire and Light, again, is this pressed glass company that's still active in Arcata. And when it was first proposed, one of the ideas was this was going to be an end market for some of the locally collected glass. Well, all manufacturers are very interested in the quality of the inputs to their production process, all of them, all the time. And so when you are asking a manufacturer to use a secondary product, a product that has been essentially collected and refined through our recycling systems, they're still as fussy as they ever were about the quality of the product that they put into their manufacturing process. And so what Fire and Light over the years has done is they have used less and less glass from Arcata, as it was originally designed to do, because it has more troubles. A little contamination, for example. One of the things we always tell people is you got to keep all of your ceramics out of glass recycling. So people get confused and they'll say, oh, I broke my coffee mug. I'll just put that in a recycling bin.
Right.
Please, no, don't. In general, if you're not sure if something is recyclable, the trash is the right place for that. When in doubt, throw it out. And the reason for that is that getting it wrong can cause lots of problems, such as, say you throw that coffee mug into the recycling system and it breaks into little pieces and you have this little chip, just this little chip of ceramics that gets mixed in with the glass cullet that they're recycling. Well, when they melt all that glass down, that ceramic causes a slightly different freezing temperature for the glass around it. And so it will cause a defect, and it will essentially create an unmarketable end product by having that little chip of ceramic in it. So it's a contaminant. And it's that kind of contamination that made Fire and Light want to use less and less of the recycled glass cullet. They still, as I understand, they're still using the clear glass, but they're not using any colored, and they're not using very much of the clear glass. Arcata is still exporting a bunch of glass because they're not able to use it all in the manufacturing
because
process.
it has this various contaminations in the collection process.
And it's more expensive for Fire and Light as a manufacturer to use that. Now, they still do use it because they like and have built their brand on saying this is a recycled glass product. So they still use the recycled glass as part of their manufacturing, but they try to use that in a way that doesn't damage their end product.
Okay, well, that certainly makes sense. And I guess it's one of the things about recycling. Here we are, it's Earth Day. And there's a lot of talk about all of the issues that are going on that affect the quality of our environment and our lives within that environment. One of those being all of this stuff that we generate as a human race, and then taking as much of that as possible and reusing it in multiple ways and multiple iterations. And I guess one of the things when it comes to recycling is that I think when it's done well, it's effective. I'm not always sure that it's done well, and some of that is on the on the individual household end. Some of that is on the way it's processed. Those kinds of things. Can you speak to recycling done well and recycling not done well, and how more of it can be done well, so that way we can make it as efficient as possible?
Yeah, it's a very broad topic.
I understand that.
So let's start talking about what recycling is in its core. Is taking a usable material and giving that one more use. You can do that through reuse. Recycling typically means using those materials in another manufacturing process. So there's collection, and there's sorting, and there's processing, and then it goes to secondary manufacture. So when recycling works well, then there's a connection between how those materials are collected, sorted, and processed, and what is the end use manufacturing. And unfortunately, as a lot of these recycling programs were really getting going in California, say 1990 on, as we were talking about the California Integrated Waste Management Act, many cities were relying on their collection companies to try to market their materials on their behalf. And so increasingly, we saw more and more of these materials being marketed to Southeast Asia. China in particular ended up buying a whole bunch of the materials that were collected for recycling on the West Coast. And that was great for a time. But China was really ramping up their manufacturing process at the time. And so at first they were willing to accept just about anything. And over time, of course, what you point out before about what makes good recycling, there's two different questions. One is, what materials are you trying to recycle? How are those separated, and are those getting to market?
Right.
And so all of those have an important place, but it should all be driven by the markets, meaning the end use of those materials. But what happened as we were really ramping up all of these recycling programs is that the economics of the people who are being paid to collect the materials were not necessarily the economics of making sure those materials were marketed for recycling. And so essentially, so long as they were making money on the collection side, the recycling side was not given a focus until we started recognizing the problems of plastics in the ocean. And there's a wonderful National Geographic article. It's a whole magazine called Planet or Plastic. And it highlights several things, but not the least of which is most of the places where our recyclable materials have been shipped for marketing as recyclable materials also have very poor land management of their of those materials. And so, for instance, if a municipality is collecting plastics 3 through 7 and marketing those, because plastics number 1 and 2 are fairly easily recycled, but plastics 3 through 7 have challenges. Well, the main driver for those people who are interested in plastics 3 through 7 is mostly plastic number 5, polypropylene. It's the plastic that's used to make bottle caps. But if you're selling your number 3 through 7 to someone who is only actually manufacturing with plastics number 5, you might ask yourself, what happens to plastics 3, 4, 6, and 7? Where do those go? Well, unfortunately, we haven't had a very good way to track those materials, because once things are marketed internationally, you can't even track where they are. You get no information.
Well, and the incentive is not to track it. The incentive is to sell it and get rid of it, right?
And unfortunately, at this point in time, that's the reassurance, because of course I'm trying to follow through on our community's good intentions to have those materials recycled. I said, so when you're marketing our 3 through 7s, what happens to 3, 4, 6, and 7? And unfortunately, the best response I've received is, well, they sold it. So you would think the people who bought it had a need for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have paid for it. Well, that still doesn't answer the question of what's happening to 3, 4, 6, and 7. So unfortunately, we're at a time where I can't offer our community the assurances I would like to, that our materials are all being recycled. I can tell you they're being marketed as recyclables, but that's not quite the same thing.
We're speaking with Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management for the County of Del Norte. You are tuned to KFUG's Public Process on your community radio station, KFUG Crescent City. I'm your host, Mike Thornton, 12:33 on this Monday afternoon. Ted, it causes me to ask something. I listen to C-SPAN every morning, okay, and they were talking about Earth Day and various topics related to it. And one of the things that I thought I heard the person saying, because it was early, I hadn't had coffee yet, was that in some ways we've done a really good job of cleaning up the U.S., but sending a lot of that stuff, as it sounds like, where our waste is going other places. And since we're talking about a globally connected Earth, that it looks good here, it doesn't look good other places. Right. There sounds like there's truth to that.
There is truth to that, and part of it has to do with our lack of tracking, and there are many, many, many people concerned about this. I know that the legislature is looking at actions on plastics this year. And so there are challenges globally in terms of plastics recycling particularly, but recycling in general. So there's a couple other things I want to add to that topic, because we aren't going to resolve this today.
There clearly
isn't a magic bullet that will address our plastics problem. But I want everybody who is interested in these things to understand something that's very fundamental, which is globally, currently, we have a petroleum-driven economy, meaning that the fuel that drives a lot of what we do comes from crude oil. Crude oil is a mixture of different hydrocarbons, and that crude oil is separated by a process called fractional distillation. You're essentially boiling that crude oil, and at different temperatures, different things boil. So the lighter fractions are the fuels. They boil off first. So butane, pentane, octane, hexane, the fuels we use in our cars, our diesel, those get sold. When you're all done boiling stuff, you have this gummy stuff at the black bottom, and that's asphalt bitumen. We use that in our roads. Well, in between, you have all these mid-grade hydrocarbons. And if you're saddled with trying to do something with those, you can either manage them as hazardous waste, or you can chemically combine them with natural gas and make a variety of plastic products. So these plastic products have found many, many different uses, and many of them are beneficial to us. But the thing I want everyone to understand is that the petroleum industry has already sold the oil. Their problem with hydrocarbons and plastics should not and must not be given to society in general as our problem. We've tried to make recycling work. We will continue to try to make recycling be part of the solution, but I want everyone to know we will not ever be able to recycle our way out of the problem of having a petroleum-driven economy.
Now, this is something, and I've never pretended to be an expert in any of this stuff, but I learned something. I think I learned something right now that I never understood at all. Let me paraphrase what I just heard you say. Part of the reason we have all of this plastic is because the petroleum industry has found a way to socialize its costs by taking all of this stuff that they really don't care about, finding a way to turn it into something else, shuffling it all off on us, so then we have to deal with it. Because for them, it's basically waste product.
That's right. That's a quick summary, and it's true. If you're a decision maker, and your choice is to pay a lot of money to try to manage something as a hazardous waste, or to make it into a product and sell it, I'm sure everyone would try to move towards the making it into a product and selling.
Yeah, no, I mean from a business aspect,
I can
sure.
understand that. But again, I want to emphasize that does not make plastics our problem to solve for them, right? You're buying a candy, right? You don't care what the wrapper is. You're buying the candy. Their choice to put it in plastics and to make that plastics be part of your problem, I'd say is unfair. And that's a difficult social transition we'll be facing with the next 20 years.
Well, and I mean, I consider myself to be a reasonably well-informed person. I've never heard anybody put it the way that you've put it. Is this a discussion that is common within the recycling industry, within the petroleum industry? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, do the people who know, are they discussing this and looking for ways out of the problem? And it's just that most of us in the general public have no idea about this.
Well, we're working on it, but in general, I'd say this is an area where people from the United States are not that aware.
Right.
We don't think of manufacturing processes in this way. We don't think of mass balance in this way. And so even people in the recycling field often start with we just recycle more. That's still not going to solve the problem. And again, I really want people to understand this in overview, because if you don't get this part, right, then we're always going to have more plastics in the environment, because I want you to understand, all right, so you're in the position of selling the crude oil, right? You sold the fuels, you've made your money. Now you've got all this stuff that you have to deal with. I want people to understand that if you make a polyester fleece pullover, right, and that exudes plastic fibers that are harming the environment for the rest of its natural life, again, you don't care. You sold the thing. It's
right.
Fine, right? Patagonia, who's done some great stuff with polyester fleece, now is actually selling products to try to capture some of those microfibers to get released. But the harm for the environment is the release of these microplastics. And so you can produce the microplastics any number of ways, whether it's the detritus from the plastic products that we use, or literally making little plastic pellets and then just having them flow down the storm drain, which is how a lot of plastic gets into the ocean, by the way, is these little nurdles are just washed off from the manufacturing yards because there isn't good land-based management for those materials. So again, all of these things we're not going to be able to recycle our way out of this. Generally, people aren't aware of this issue, but the reason why I'm highlighting this is people are concerned increasingly about global warming. They're also concerned about plastics. I want people to understand these are different aspects of the same problem. problem.
Well, and it makes me think there's I'll try to do it very succinctly. There's, a story that I was working in community organizing, and there's a story we use. It's a bunch of people live by a river, and they find a basket in the river, and they fish the basket out. There's a baby in the basket. Well, what do we got to do? Well, we got to do something about the baby and feed the baby, clothe the baby, and all that. And then the next week, there's 10 baskets and 10 babies, 100 baskets, 1,000 baskets, 10,000 baskets. They're building adoption agencies, social service agencies, all of this stuff. And then one day somebody says, well, maybe we need to go upriver and find out where these babies are coming from. Maybe we can do something about it up there as compared to just trying to do more and more and more of it down here. And it sounds to me that despite all the good intentions and hard work and all of the stuff that goes into trying to deal with this plastic downriver, what we really need to be doing is going upriver and saying, no, we need to have you deal with it at the source of all of this, what becomes waste that in many ways is destroying our planet.
Yes, but there are good things about plastics. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
We go to a hospital. If my life is depending on plastic products, I'd very much like that product to be used. So I don't think we need to say that there's been no good activity here. However, I do think we need to put it into context and to think about the flow of materials and what is the right course of action. The analogy is generally exactly right.
Yeah, it's having a broader perspective of what the scope of the problem as compared to just looking at it in these isolated slices.
Right.
We're talking with Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management for the County of Del Norte. This is Public Process on KFUG.
So I'd like to pivot a little bit to, we've talked about some of the challenge. Well, first of all, I do want to hit head on something that I've heard from folks, because we are talking about recycling. And they said, recycling, isn't that just kind of a failed liberal dream? And I
Gee, I wonder who you're talking to in this community.
People have those perspectives, and so I think it's important to understand head on. No, it's not so much a failed liberal dream. It's really so much a matter of, we have this stuff in our material economy. Do we manage that in a way that protects future generations, or do we manage it in a way that we're pushing our problem onto future generations? Unfortunately, I'd say more we're on the latter than we're on the former. But taking plastics as a good example, no, it's not so much that it's a failed dream. It's a matter of, no, we could not recycle our way out of the problem that the petroleum industry handed to us. That's the right way to look at it. The dollar stores, right? What are they? They're purveyors of plastic products. Look across the shelves. How many of those are plastic products? You just ask yourself. Why are they so cheap? Because it's a byproduct. They've already sold the fuel.
Well, that leads me to ask a question, and time is going really, really quickly here. This is incredibly informative. I want to make sure that we have you back at some point to talk more about all of this.
And we also do have a Rethinking Recycling program on once a month on Fridays with Paul. And
I heard it, which was I found that to be really informative as well. So Ted, can we talk a little bit about the political environment when it comes to all of this?
Sure.
Because I really do. Once again, an example from this morning, it's all a myth, it's all a hoax, it's all this, it's all that. And when you have people in positions of political power who are buying into that and promoting that, it's got to make it all that much harder.
It can, but everybody's the world's expert on their own opinion. And it's okay.
Well, yeah, but you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And I don't mean you personally.
You're absolutely right. But we all have, areas that we're not as informed about. And so we have to count on the opinion of others. And some folks trust opinions that really shouldn't be trusted.
And there you go.
So there you go. So,
There
but
you
it
go.
is a political arena, and that's okay, because these are community issues. When we're trying to talk about what is the right collection system and what's the right rate for our community, everybody has an opinion on that, and they should.
I guess. I mean, I philosophically, I agree with that. And at the same, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who's a more purveyor of free speech than I am. And I want to say that. I want to be really clear on that. And, but stupid is stupid. And when stupid starts harming other people and harming our environment, I'm sorry, not all opinions are of equal validity. They're just not. And when you see that the origin, or the oranges, as some people might want to say, of these problems, come from, paid shills of the petroleum industry, which then get regurgitated and repeated, and then all of a sudden you have people pontificating on them as though they are actual facts and truth, that's a problem, because it's not just a problem for us today, it's a problem for our kids and their kids, and whether or not they're going to actually have a livable planet on which to exist.
I really agree with something you were pointing out there, which is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, which is how the PR industry works, how people come to have very friendly opinions about the oil refining industry, for example, even though they may not have very many dealings with it at all. That didn't happen by accident. And so I think we're really coming to a point where the ways that many of us are illiterate is not so much being able to read and write anymore, but being able to assess the quality of the information. And I think the information literacy increasingly is an area where we need to all up our game.
Well, and it's that, yes, and it's actually, this is a strategy. And it is a strategy that is being consciously and expertly implemented in order to protect the economic interests of powerful and well-connected corporations that have as their primary motivating factor profit as compared to community and planetary stewardship. Am I going too far off the rails with this?
Well, I don't think it's a topic that I'm even well versed enough just to do more than to recognize that this is an ongoing area of concern. How we educate ourselves and inform ourselves is a much more relevant area of discussion than I really expected it to be 20 years ago. For example, just taking the basics of a community newspaper. The triplicates reduce the amount of days that it's in circulation.
Right.
We were just talking about the changes at KHSU. We're talking about the changes in Sinclair. Really, finding information that you can trust, knowing how you trust that information, and knowing where to double check an information, a controversial opinion, I think are really important skills that we all need to build.
Well, and it's important for those people who don't. You can tell me if I'm wrong, the reference to Sinclair. Sinclair has bought up a number of local media outlets and venues. They have a very, very defined political agenda, and that political agenda is, somewhat more or less, perhaps even farther to the right of Fox. It is a propaganda effort, and it's really, especially when you have people who really know how to do it well, it's really difficult to tell the difference between propaganda and information. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've been speaking with Ted Ward, director of Del Norte Solid Waste Management, And we've talked about a lot of different things, Ted.
I got one more for you.
No, throw it at me, you know what I mean? Because we want to make sure we get in. We got just a couple of minutes left.
Okay, well, the last one is what we're going to be talking about the next round for the Rethinking Recycling program, which is product stewardship. A term that maybe not a lot of people are familiar with, but if you look at how recycling programs have expanded in terms of the varieties of materials that are recycled, most of the expansion of recycling in California have been product stewardship programs. So we now have product stewardship programs for mercury thermostats, household paints, let me go through.
That's okay. We're speaking with Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management here in Del Norte. I'm Mike Thornton. This is Public Process.
And household batteries. So just wrapping up and bringing full circle my story about digging my own pits and then finding a use for batteries. I'm happy to say that in terms of convenience, Del Norte County has among the most convenient battery recycling programs in the country. Most places where you buy batteries, you can bring them back for recycling. You just got to tape one end, and then you can put them in bags. But we also take those at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. But that's all household batteries. So alkaline batteries, rechargeable batteries, watch batteries, hearing aid batteries, all of those can be recycled. And if you got any further questions about that, you can call us at 465-1100 or see our website at recycledelnorte.ca.gov. This is a program, a product stewardship program in partnership with a group called Call to Recycle, and they're the largest battery recycling program in the country.
And there's a larger perspective on product stewardship, whereas as people are selling products, and it's starting to, with a lot of different things, it's like there's also a way when they have outlived their useful life that those things are taken back, and those corporations that produce them have some responsibility of doing something with them.
That's exactly the idea. So it's not perfect. There's always learning processes. But it's better than it was. So, for example, for mattresses, if you buy a mattress or a box spring, you pay an extra $10.50 to make sure that there's a recycling program available. And we now have a program that's open Wednesdays and Saturdays at Humboldt Moving and Storage from 9 to 1. They'll take up to 6 mattresses. We also have periodic events at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. We have one coming up in early May to receive up to 4 mattresses and box springs for no charge. And again, that's through a product stewardship program put on by the Mattress Recycling Council. So it's a new recycling program, but it is paid for by the people who are manufacturing that product.
We've been speaking with Ted Ward, Director of Solid Waste Management for the County of Del Norte. Ted, if people want to get more information, what's the best way for them to do that?
465-1100.
Thank you so much for being with us. I desperately want to have you on again. There's a whole lot more to talk about.
Thank you.
Stay tuned to KFUG Crescent City. I'm Mike Thornton. This has been Public Process, your community radio station, KFUG Crescent City.
Okay.